there, Mary here from Mary's Heirloom Seeds, and welcome to my video, Seed Starting 101. I have quite a few videos already on YouTube, Facebook, and tips on our website, marysheirloomseeds.com, on seed starting. But today I had the honor of teaching a Seed Starting 101 class at Bob Wells Nursery at Sorrel Farms in Mineola, Texas. And when I posted the information on our social media, there were so many people that don't live around here that wanted the information that I promised I would do a video specific to what I discussed during the seed starting class today. So I am going to share with you seed starting information. It's awesome. We start talking about seed starting when it's cold and we're not necessarily planting outside. And then we talk about cool weather crops in the summertime because we're preparing for our garden. So I hope you enjoy this video. If you have any questions, you can always comment below or send an email to mary@marysheirloomseeds.com. Now, to get started, most importantly, you want to choose which seeds you want to grow. I've said it many times before, if you don't like eating butternut squash, you don't have to plant butternut squash. You can plant pretty much anything you want for your area. In a recent live video, I discussed garden planning. So that video might come in handy, and it's in the description section of this video. You don't need fancy greenhouses, high tunnels, seed starting kits. You can keep it as simple as you want. You can make it as high tech as you want. It is literally as simple as needing sun, soil, and seeds, as well as, of course, oxygen. Just like humans, our seeds need oxygen and our seeds need water to grow and thrive. But I will talk about seed starting outside and seed starting indoors in this comprehensive video. Seeds require three major things. That is going to be water, oxygen, and proper temperature to germinate. Too much water will cause your seeds to rot or mold, and not enough water if your seeds are already starting to germinate, they're now alive, and then if you let them dry out, chances are they are now dead. So you want to have a balance of water. You don't want, again, too much, and you don't want too little. Most seeds will germinate at an optimal temperature of between 68 and 80 degrees. Now, I know that's a big jump there. So I'll discuss a couple of indoor tips as well, but it's all going to depend on what you're planting. So cool weather crops generally can tolerate a little cooler of a soil. So if you are direct sowing, you're going to want to make sure your soil is warmed up before you got started on your planting. And if you're starting seeds indoors, you're going to want to find a place or a warmer spot for your seeds to germinate. As a general rule, seeds, as far as depth of planting, it is 2 to 3 times the width of the actual seed is how deep you're going to plant your seeds. Now, that means that smaller seeds like tomatoes obviously are going to need less depth planted than, say, a squash seed or a bean seed, right? Another requirement for some seeds is cold stratification. And I have a couple of those just to give you an example. We have lavender, we have rosemary, and we have mint leaf bee balm. Those are just a couple of seed varieties specifically that benefit from cold stratification for optimal germination. Now, cold stratification is simply mimicking nature. You can either direct sow outside. Some people call it winter sowing, and you're going to do that and allow Mother Nature to take its course, or you can cold stratify yourself indoors using a refrigerator. The easiest way some people have found is to just take these seed packs and put them in the refrigerator. You're going to do that for 6 weeks prior to planting outside or prior to planting indoors in your containers, or you can take one of these food containers and what I do is I fill it up with coconut coir about a 1/2 inch deep, and then I sprinkle my seeds on top. Make sure the soil is moist. That's really important. I mentioned moisture already. And then you're going to put your lid on it. You don't want to close it all the way. Now, one thing that's super important to remember now, if you are cold stratifying in the refrigerator, is to label your containers. I have permanent markers here as a reminder. I can't tell you how many times I've had customers reach out to me and they said someone in their household, spouse, significant other, or just a person you're living with has thrown out their containers because they just thought it was a piece of old food, and they're like, what is this doing in the refrigerator? And they toss it out. So make sure you label it. Tell whoever's in your household, hey, this is important. These are my seeds that I'm cold stratifying for future. Comfrey is another one. In my comprehensive planting guide, I have an article titled a growing list of herbs and flowers to cold stratify. So I've added to that list, and it's a great place to start if you're not sure whether it needs cold stratification or just direct sowing. Most annuals, fruits and vegetables don't require cold stratification for optimal germination. They just need the basics, oxygen, water, and of course, warmer temperatures. So there's a couple things for direct sowing for you to remember. One, as I mentioned earlier, is warmer soil. And the second is well-draining soil. That goes back to the water. So you want to find a place, if you're direct sowing, that gets adequate sunlight, adequate moisture without being flooded. And then also you're going to want to wait till after your frost dates. So I've discussed frost dates in depth last year because it was really important. Your last frost date is your spring frost date. That's the date that you, an estimate, remember, I've discussed that as well. An estimated frost date is typically, I use the Old Farmer's Almanac, and it's an estimate based on the last 10 years of frost dates. So in my area, for example, it was November 12th, I believe, last year. Well, we had a frost the third week of October. So it's an estimate based on your area and based on the history of your area. For my area in Ben Wheeler, my last frost date for spring is going to be March 15th. So I know that that's the general idea of when things might start warming up in the soil. You can purchase a soil temperature meter. You just slide it in the soil and it'll tell you approximately what your soil is. And that's a great way to determine if it's ready to plant outside. But if you're indoor seed starting, you still want to know when your frost dates are, because we generally count back 6 to 8 weeks from your last frost date, and that's when you should start planting indoors. Some people like to go crazy and start January 1st when you're not planting out until April. I prefer to wait a little longer because my tomatoes, I've got a forest of tomatoes by that time. And so not everybody has the kind of space for a forest of tomatoes. So timing is important for you for those. Some crops don't like to be sown indoors and transplanted out. And most of those are root crops and a couple more tender crops. So I don't plant root crops like beets, radish, turnips, garlic. Those are direct sown in the garden all the time. And then things like beans and watermelon, those should be planted directly in the soil because they don't like to be disrupted once they've gotten started growing. So something to consider. You can definitely try to plant them indoors and transplant them outside, but I prefer personally to direct sow those particular varieties because they're fairly successful. Now, a couple of varieties that are fantastic to start indoors, I already mentioned tomatoes, of course, and then a couple others are peppers and eggplant. These are varieties that take significantly longer than, say, beans to grow from seed. So, for example, tomatoes can be 110 to 120 days if you direct sow in your garden, whereas it can be about 80 days if you grow indoors and then transplant out, and it's 80 days from transplant. Whereas a bean plant from seed is ready to harvest in about 60 days. So you don't have as much of a time crunch on beans, for example, as you would tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. So Squash, for example, fairly simple and easy to grow from seed. And if I started it indoors 8 weeks, I would have a massive plant. So I like to direct sow things like squash and pumpkins as well. There are containers you can use for indoors. You can do your own recycled containers, or you can use some of the different things that we already have at Mary's Heirloom Seeds. So we've got a 6-cell germination tray. These are really cool and really easy to use. There's holes in the bottom for drainage. Remember, we talked about water, too much water, not enough water. When I use germination trays, I never leave them in standing water. I always make sure that when I use a tray, I'll show you these trays. These come with some of our kits. Trays are super easy to use, and you want to bottom water your seedlings. When I take this and I leave it in here, you can put a bunch of them in here actually. I will bottom water this tray so that I'm not splashing out my seeds everywhere, and I want to make sure that I'm not over watering as well. Your soil medium, your growing medium will wick up from the bottom to the top to feed your seedlings. You've got coconut coir pellets. Those are some of my favorites as well. These cute little things here are awesome because you can plant your seed right in the middle. And when this is ready to be transplanted, you just take this entire pod and transplant it directly into the garden. I've got a really cute video, fun video, whatever you want to call it. And it's the coconut coir pellets when I added warm water to it, and they just grow. It's really fun. So the coconut coir pellets are also available at Mary's Heirloom Seeds. They are a self-contained pod. You can use a tray, just like I showed you a second ago, or this is what comes with our loofah starter kit. You get 10 coconut coir pellets, and actually only about 8 fit, but that way you can get a second round. I like these because they're all reusable. There's tons of kits you can buy. These are just the simple, easy ways for seed starting, specifically indoors or even outside. I have even used the coconut coir pellets outside, and they're easy to use, except that no matter whether you're growing indoors or outside, you want to manage your moisture properly. If you don't check it often and it dries out, again, you're not getting enough water and you might be killing those precious little seedlings. There are so many options. You've got coconut coir bricks in a larger size. You've got do-it-yourself pods where you can actually do these yourself. And I've got a video for that as well. And I love coconut coir. So if you are using a growing medium indoors, I would highly recommend using something a little more sterile than outside inputs. So for example, when I'm starting seeds outside, I use coconut coir, perlite, and compost. This, for example, this is a gallon Ziploc bag. That is a lot of growing medium. And this was once this. It's a compressed coconut coir brick, and these are the smaller bricks that we carry. This will go a long way to fill up those either the pods or the trays. And it is a sterile growing medium. It hasn't been outside, so you're not going to have any fungus gnats. That's one of the more frustrating things that we deal with when we have indoor growing, is if I were to take my compost from outside and bring it in, I might be bringing in critters. And if you have a secure area for your seed starts, that may be fine. Some people are growing in their home and maybe you don't want fungus gnats in your house. So using a sterile growing medium, you can buy seed starter soil in bags. That is helpful, but I like to use things that I have already here, which is the compost and the perlite. You can use household items for seed starting. Use an empty toilet paper roll, and you snip the bottom, fold the bottom, and stuff it with some of the compost, or not compost, excuse me, some of the coconut coir and the perlite, and now you have a homemade seed starter pod, and you didn't have to go to the store and buy anything. You can also use recycled containers that you would have food in, as long as you wash them. So you can use yogurt containers, things like the sour cream containers or cottage cheese, depending on what you use in your own household, if you use those things. There's other recycled items you can use. If you buy the lettuce in the grocery store in those plastic containers. You can reuse those for seed starting. You can either sprinkle some medium on the bottom, some growing medium on the bottom, and just sprinkle your seeds there, or you can use that as a tray instead of having to buy a tray. And you can use them for coconut coir pellets or the 6-cell germination trays. Super easy, right? A couple things to mention is wash your containers. Every year, all of these containers are reusable. Not the coconut coir pellets, but the tray that it's in. They're all reusable, but you want to make sure you wash them. You don't want to bring any kind of soil bacteria from last year into your new grow. So wash them with soap and water. I don't use bleach. I just use soap and water. We use Dr. Bronner's, and it's really simple. You just want to make sure you get the soap out, and then go for it. Same with the food containers. If you're recycling food containers, you want to make sure you wash them well before you reuse them. You don't want to bring mold that could develop on any food that's left over in those containers into your soil. Super easy, right? Just wash it and you're good to go. Be sure to moisten your soil prior to planting. So today we're talking about Seed Starting 101. And if you haven't watched any of my old videos, this is a compilation of almost all of that in a more comprehensive, in-depth version of seed starting. So you get all of the great information here. So make sure when you're starting your seeds that you start with moist soil. So for example, in-ground carrots can be really tricky. And one of the things that I found that works really well is cardboard. Some people say that they don't use cardboard or they refuse to use it, which is totally fine. But what I have found that works is taking your garden bed. A lot of my garden beds are raised beds. So you take your garden space and you moisten the soil prior to planting your seeds. And what I generally do is I sprinkle the carrot seeds on the top of the soil. Then I add moist soil on top of that, not a lot of it. And then I make sure it's moist. Then I put a piece of cardboard over it. It just secures it and keeps it ready to go. And it kind of just, it's almost like a greenhouse effect, like you would have these in a greenhouse. And check it. Make sure it stays moist. Spray some water on it gently so you don't displace your seeds. And carrot seeds can take anywhere from 7 days to 21 days to germinate. Usually by 14 days, you should be seeing some germination, some little teeny greens. Now, what you want to do is if you're using the cardboard method, make sure you keep the soil moist and check it regularly. As soon as you see a little green coming up, then you're going to remove that cardboard and you're going to let it thrive. And by doing that, hopefully you have a successful carrot crop. So we talked about moisture. Now we need to talk about light. Speaking of light, if you are growing indoors, I have a whole video on different indoor lights and how to grow with indoor lights. But to keep it simple, if you're growing indoors, a sunny windowsill usually isn't enough. A sunny windowsill will allow your seeds to produce a seedling, but then they tend to be a little on the leggier side. So we use grow lights. If you are growing indoors, these are some of the things that will be helpful. Not necessarily required, but if you want the best experience, a grow light is a beneficial option. And you want your grow light to be 2 to 3 inches off of your seedling. So seeds don't necessarily, not all seeds, need light to germinate, but once they sprout, they're gonna need some light. And you wanna keep it close enough so that your seeds don't get too skinny or scrawny or leggy, but you want it close enough that it gets a good amount of light. And that's super important. Thinning. Now, you've already planted your seeds, you've kept them warm with a grow mat. Have you ever heard of a grow mat? I had this question during the video or during the class today, and that was, I want to start seeds in my garage. Is a heat mat sufficient? And that's a great question because there are different types of heat mats. One will just keep the soil approximately 7 to 10 degrees above the ambient temperature. So if your garage is cold, We had 9 degrees here in East Texas recently, and so my garage was very cold. Now, if I have one that only gets me a little bit above ambient temperature, my soil temperature is going to get very low. There are other heat mats that you can plug in what temperature you want. It's got a thermostat on it. They're probably a little more expensive, but in general, they're going to give you a stronger heat than the one that just gets you a little bit above ambient temperature. Now, if I'm growing indoors, I've shown you my grow tent. If I'm growing indoors, I generally don't need one that is that high powered of a heat mat. But if I was growing in a shed or in a garage, I would want something that would give me a little bit of a stronger warmth to keep my seeds and my soil warm. So you need oxygen. You don't want too much water. You want water, of course, and you want a warm soil for germination. So these are all very, very important. Now, we have seedlings growing, right? And we've got these little teeny seedlings. I see a lot of instructions, sometimes my own, that say put 2 or 3 seeds per cell. So this is a 6 cell. And if you put 2 or 3 seeds, say tomato seeds in here, what if you have awesome germinating seeds and all 3 seeds germinate? What do you do? Now is the time to thin your seedlings. Now, you can be very, very gentle, or you can be a little more sacrificial, I guess you could call it. So some people will take the cell and they will gently remove the 3, and you can gently separate them and move them into multiple containers. If that is a little more difficult for you or not something you're interested in, you are going to have to sacrifice 2 out of the 3. You want to see the strongest of the seedlings, and then you're going to use small trimmers. Don't pull it out. Whatever you do, don't pull it out. You're going to use small trimmers and trim just at the baseline and cut those 2 off and leave the 3rd strong one. Now, the reason I say use trimmers is because if you take those 2 and you pull it out, you are potentially disturbing the healthy roots for the healthy plant, and you might actually be then sacrificing all 3 of your seedlings. So don't do that. Don't pull it up. Trim them off. I heavy seed radish, lettuce, beets, because I love thinning. I love being able to harvest some of the thinnings. They're completely edible. They're no different than microgreens that you might buy in the store or you might grow yourself. They're just a little more simply scattered out there and you're good to go. And I even have some pictures of radish microgreens that I grew in our tent. They were delicious. They were absolutely delicious. I like onion microgreens as well. They are fantastic. So we got moisture, we got light, we got thinnings, and lastly we have hardening off. Now, if you're growing seeds indoors, you're going to want to make sure that they are acclimated to the outside. Now, I struggle with this all the time because sometimes I am so excited to plant these seeds outside that I might rush into transplanting, and sometimes that can harm your seedlings. If they are not acclimated to the outside, they've had perfect temperatures all the time. For example, if you have lights, you're not going to do it 24 hours a day. You're going to do 12 and 12. You can do 24, but I like 12 and 12 because it gives it a better idea of what the outside is going to be. But it's been 80 degrees in your grow tent, for example, and you might be transplanting out and it'll be 50 degrees at night. And so you want to give them a little chance to acclimate to your outside temperature, acclimate to the sunlight instead of a grow light, and preferably in an area that you aren't going to have critters. I know that can be super frustrating when you have spent all this time on planting your seeds and growing your seedlings, and then you put them outside, squirrels take over, or your cats eat it, or your dogs eat it. So put it in an area that is hopefully away from pests that might be chewing on them when you want them to be living and providing food for you. Now, I said lastly, but I also have some troubleshooting I'm going to discuss too. Plant markers. Label, label, label. In one of the previous videos I have is labeling, and I shared all sorts of different unique ideas and how to label your plants. We've got simple bamboo markers. We've got plastic markers. We actually had one of our kittens, we call them tiny terrors because they are somewhat destructive in their little ages. They ate the blinds. They chewed the blinds in half. And so instead of taking those blinds and throwing them out, we reused them. And I took the blind pieces and I cut them in pieces, and I made plant markers out of them. And if you have something like that laying around, you have an endless supply of plant markers that you'll never have to buy again. You can paint rocks. There are a lot of great and unique varieties or unique ways to label your crops. Every year around this time, I get emails or messages from customers saying, Mary, what is this? And I can tell you this, I can tell the difference between a tomato seedling and say a squash seedling or a bean seedling. But if you want me to differentiate between, say, a Cherokee purple tomato and an Zoytska tomato, you're on your own. I can't tell that until you actually have some produce and you see obviously one is producing a purple tomato and one is producing a yellow tomato. Both of those are regular leaf tomatoes, so I wouldn't be able to determine which was which. I can tell the difference between a regular leaf and a potato leaf tomato, but that's completely different. So troubleshooting. So you are growing your garden, and one of the ladies in the video or in the class today, she said, she got some seeds out there, she got them ready to go, and then they died. And so she was asking, like, what do we do? So number one is leggy seedlings. And I'll get to the dying in just a second. Leggy seedlings, I mentioned earlier. If you are growing indoors, you're going to want to make sure your light source is very close to your seedlings. Another thing you can do, you don't necessarily have to toss out a whole tray of leggy seedlings. You can try transplanting those. We call it up potting. So if you are using these tiny things, the only drawback that I've had from using the smaller germination trays is you've got to transplant them fairly quickly so that you have more room for your roots to grow. But if you're growing it in here and they're leggy, you have to transplant them anyway. And what you can do with leggy seedlings is transplant them deeper than the regular soil level. Say, for example, for tomatoes, they're notorious for being leggy if you don't have adequate light source. And then you should have a healthier plant as it starts to grow if you have your light source closer. Another troubleshooting issue that people have is damping off. Damping off is a fungus on your soil. It can be fuzzy, or you might just notice it right away. It starts to make the stems of your seedling a little darker, and then the next day they're flopped on their side. And I think that was what the issue for the lady in my class today was. She said one day they were fine and the next day they were just flopped on the ground and dead. And chances are that's probably what it was. You can avoid damping off by having some sort of airflow in your inside garden area. You can also help by bottom watering in your tray, so you're not gonna water right on the tray. You're gonna water the actual tray, and the moisture is gonna go up. Some people have recommended you using a diluted solution of hydrogen peroxide on your soil to get rid of any type of diseases that might be present. But another really great option that I learned from Little Bits of Heaven Homestead was using cinnamon. Cinnamon is a natural antimicrobial, and you can sprinkle it on your soil as your seedlings grow to help prevent damping off. It's not going to save your plants. I'm sorry. Usually once you have damping off on your plants, that's it. You've already, they're not going to make it, unfortunately. But there is hope if you can maybe work towards having healthier soil prior to that happening. So that would be hopefully helpful. Another option is, another issue is using old seeds. I have a ton of old seeds, and I don't We don't sell old seeds. We donate them to school gardens across the US. We donate them to veterans gardens and just different nonprofit gardens around the US. So we don't sell you old seeds, but what if you personally had a pack of tomato seeds that you saved yourself from your garden, and maybe they're 10 years old, and maybe you want to try to grow those. So you want to do a germination test. You can use a wet paper towel and a plastic bag, or you can use a wet towel in any type of container. And the best way, the easiest way, is to do 10 seeds. 10 seeds will give you a general idea of the actual germination rate of those tomatoes. You want to keep it warm. I like to put it above the refrigerator. Just don't forget. I have definitely forgotten my seeds on occasion and had to start all over again. But if you do a germination test of your old seeds, that will give you an idea of what your germination rate will be. And that way you're not depending on old seeds that may or may not produce. If you have, say, 9 out of 10 germinate, you are on the right track and you should have a good germination rate. If only 1 germinates, then maybe either you need to depend on another seed variety or plant more and hope you get more. Planting too deep is another issue that I have run into with customers. You don't want to plant your seeds too deep because they won't be given a healthy chance to thrive and come out of the soil. So you want to make sure that you are giving them adequate depth, but not too much depth. So I mentioned earlier, the general guideline is 2 to 3 times their width in depth of planting. So obviously tomatoes are going to be planted a little more shallow than, say, a bean or a squash plant. But then some varieties, like yarrow, for example, likes light in order to germinate. So you're not going to plant those under the soil. You're just going to sprinkle the yarrow seeds on top of the soil and moisten the soil when you're done, after you've already moistened it before. So you have moist soil, you have seeds, moisten it again, and you're good to go. And that's partly why I like these coconut coir pellets. They are all in one, so I don't have to, they're teeny tiny seeds, and I don't necessarily have to worry about it. So we have a lot of great information available down in the description section. I share this every single time. My comprehensive planting guide is full of helpful information. But like I said, I just taught a class on Seed Starting 101 at Bob Wells Nursery in Mineola. So I wanted to share all of this great information with you. And before I finish, I'll share with you also what I have on my table. We have coconut coir pellets. These are by the 100. We have a bulk coconut coir brick. So there's 2 different types of coconut coir at marysheirloomseeds.com. This is a bulk brick, and this is just a regular brick. We have the regular bricks that also come as a do-it-yourself, so you can use these and fill them with your own coconut coir. We have 6-cell germination trays. We have all new starter kits. These are so much fun because the bags are reusable. I print them myself. It's a nice little stress reliever. We have a pollinator starter kit, a lavender starter kit. We've got a pepper, tomato, and squash. All of these are available at Mary's Heirloom Seeds. And of course, if you have questions, you can always reach out. You can send me an email to mary@marysheirloomseeds.com, and I will try to answer your question. If you're looking for where to get soil, where to get which grow light or whatever that you have questions about, reach out. If you're wondering what to plant in your area, maybe you're wondering what's the easiest crops to grow, that's also in my comprehensive planting guide down in the description section. So if you've got questions, reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. And I hope you enjoyed my video. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. Share the video with anybody that you think could benefit from my Seed Starting 101 class. I am Mary from Mary's Heirloom Seeds, signing off, and happy planting.